Now, there's a good chance that I'm weird. Thank you. I mean, in one particular case. I don't know if this happens to you, but it happens to me all the time. The more confident I am about something when I start doing it, the less confident I am when I'm done. It's a very strange thing. I don't know if it's just because I'm broken in the head, because my music teachers when I was a kid gave me way too much negative reinforcement, but if I'm super confident about something when I get started, by the time it's over, I'm like, oh man, that is the worst thing that I have ever done. It could not have gone badly or worse. See, I'm very confident in the English language today. You can tell that it's just not going to go well. But it seems to happen all the time. When I know that I did something really good or I'm about to do something really good, afterwards I'm like, oh man, what was I even thinking? I must have just been completely confused and had no idea what's going on. So whenever I'm very confident about something anymore, I get nervous. I just immediately go, wait, what did I mess up? What did I get wrong in this thing that I'm so confident about? Because something will go wrong in the middle. For instance, today, for reasons that don't bear explaining, I was super confident that I was perfectly capable of taking apart a shower head. I now have an abundance of shower head parts that I'm not quite sure how they fit back together that I'm going to have to deal with when I get home today. This is how things go. It happens with sermons. It happens when I'm playing music. Just no matter what it is, I go into something thinking, this is great. And at the end, I think, ugh. So when I see situations like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whose names are complicated, and I'm going to, from now on, just call Chad, Mike, and Abe, because those are easier. Chad, Mike, and Abe. These guys were super confident, but it's really odd what they're confident about. There's one line in the story that stuck with me when I was getting ready for this sermon. I know that our God can save us, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to worship your gods. I think that's very interesting. You've got these three guys who are in trouble because they didn't bow down and worship an image at the command of the king. And whenever I thought about this story before, I thought they were super confident that God was going to save them. But that doesn't seem to be what they're confident about. Because he continues with that interesting little line. Even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down and worship your gods. Now, if they were Christians, this would make sense. There's all kinds of stories about Christian martyrs going to their death, singing hymns and praising God as they're being chased by lions or burned at the stake. They have record of this, of these martyrs that just go praising God the whole time because they know that their death will both be a witness to God and that they have the promise of a resurrection to eternal life to look forward to. But at this point in Judaism, Chad, Mike, and Abe don't have that. The idea of a resurrection of the dead was just barely starting to develop. And one of the first places you see it is, well, about 9 chapters later in the book of Daniel. So what is it that they're so confident in? And I think the thing that they're confident in is not a thing at all, but a who. They're confident in God. And because they're so confident in God, they know that they're not going to bow down and worship some other God because their God, they know is the true God. They're not worried about dying in a fiery furnace because they know that their God is a true God. Their God says, don't bow down to any other idols, so they're not going to because they're that confident in God. I have a hard time imagining that kind of confidence because of how I feel when I'm confident about something. I have a hard time having the kind of confidence to know that if I'm going into what is obviously a bad situation, I worry. I'm very much a worrier. I think, oh, what's this going to do? What's this going to do? What's that other thing going to do? That fire looks really hot. But not Chad, Mike, and Abe. They got to see, they knew the threat of the fiery furnace. They saw the fiery furnace, and they still said, we're not going to bow down and worship your God. Whatever you're going to do to us is fine. We're going to worship our God and not your God, whether he saves us or not. And this is even more interesting when you know Chad, Mike, and Abe's story. You see, these three guys were taken probably in their early teens from their homes, taken and put into Babylon in exile, where they started to go through an indoctrination process. They were fed the best food. They were given new names. Their names used to be Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. I bet you never hear those names. Because for the rest of the book of Daniel, they are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're given new Babylonian names. They're made to eat Babylonian food until they put up a little fight and say, hey, we don't want to pollute ourselves with your food. Give us just vegetables. And then it's a whole thing in Daniel chapter 1. But the Babylonians are trying to get the Israelite out of these Israelites, to try to make them into good Babylonian servants. And that's what they've put up with for their entire life. People trying to tell them not to believe in the God that they believe in, not to live the way that they've been trying to live. Don't bother not eating pork. That's not a big deal. And yet they still stood firm in their faith because they were confident in God. And so when Nebuchadnezzar builds this golden idol and commands everyone around to bow down to this idol, these three don't. Because they're thinking, because I am confident in my God and I know what my God has said, I cannot bow down to this. I cannot worship this, no matter what happens. And so Nebuchadnezzar has them arrested on a tip from some people that were more likely jealous of them. They were raised to some pretty high positions in the Babylonian Empire, and there's always people that are going to be cranky when that happens. So Nebuchadnezzar finds out, has them arrested and brought before him, and he just goes, why didn't you bow down? Well, we know their answer, and that did not make Nebuchadnezzar happy. Because at that point, Nebuchadnezzar said, oh man, we need a really hot furnace. We need a furnace 7 times hotter than I thought it was going to need. I want a furnace so hot that nobody can imagine anything hotter. And so he does. He has the furnace made so hot that the guards who throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into it die. And then we get this great scene that you can't not laugh at. Nebuchadnezzar looks into this fiery furnace and goes, hey, how many people did we throw in here? And all of the advisors go, 3? There's 3 guys you threw in there. We tied them up, right? Yeah, they were tied up. So how come there's 4 guys walking around in there now? And all the advisors went, I don't know. Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in their confidence in God, God saved them. He saved them to show something to Nebuchadnezzar of who he is. Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they didn't care all that much about if or not God saved them. And I think that's so interesting. They didn't go into this thinking that God was going to save them. They went into this thinking, I'm not bowing down to that idol. because I know the creator of the universe. But God did save them. And God saved them, and then Nebuchadnezzar goes, you know what? If anybody talks bad about this God that can save people from this super hot fiery furnace, well, let's just say it's not a pretty picture. Now, I think it's interesting that even in the prayer today, the way that I've always heard this story preached is that these three Jews were confident that God would save them. They were waiting for God to save them, and that's why they went through all of this. But I don't think that's right. And I don't think that's helpful for us, because then when we go into situations that we're in trouble, whether it's sickness, whether it's financial difficulties, no matter what it is, if we go into it with the attitude of thinking God will save us, then what happens to us when God doesn't save us in quite the way we expected? If we go into, if we have some illness and we go in expecting, God is going to heal me from this miraculously. And if God doesn't do that, we get a little disappointed. If we say, God is going to save me from this God is going to get me a new job when you need a new job. If God doesn't give us exactly the job we're looking for, we get a little disappointed. But if instead of we're being confident in God saving us, if we are just confident in God, it changes our perspective. If we are confident in God in the midst of illness, then whether God chooses to save us miraculously through a doctor and medicine, or even if he heals us at the resurrection, we are still confident in God, not in an action that he takes, not in something that he has to do or not do, but in him, in the person who is God. If we're struggling with our finances and we're confident that God is going to magically put $1,000 into our checking account, because I've known people like that, then we get a little disappointed when it doesn't happen. But if we're struggling with finances and we're confident that God is a God who cares even for the animals, then we know that even while we struggle with money, we know that God is still God. That's why it's so important to not put our confidence in something that God might do, but instead to put our trust in the person who does things, the person who brings us peace, the person who says, don't worry about tomorrow, because who by worrying can change the number of hairs on your head? Now, of course, you might make the number go down. I know when my cat gets stressed, she starts pulling out hair. That's why her name is Fluff. She fluffs everywhere. But when we have someone that we can lean on, when we have someone who buoys us up even when everything else around us is crashing down, that's when we can get through those things. That's what gives us the confidence to say to the Nebuchadnezzars of the world, I am not bowing down to your idol. Whether God saves me from the furnace or not, I'm still not bowing down. It's the kind of confidence that leads Jesus to Pilate to say, my kingdom's not of this world. If it was, my followers would stop my arrest. It's what leads Paul to say, I know that whether I'm in prison or whether I'm free, no matter where I'm at, I know God. And it's in knowing God that he finds his strength. It's in knowing God that he finds his peace. It's in knowing God that he knows what's next. Because when we have that confidence, knowing who God is, that is what gives us the confidence in everything else in our lives. When God is the center of our life, everything else becomes a thing that with God we can deal with. And that is what God is calling us, each and every one of us, to do, to put all of our trust in Him. To not trust in account balances or ourselves or this brand new fancy safety thing, but to put our trust in God. I think that's the encouragement that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's story has for us. Not to always be looking to God to save us from these situations, but in whatever situation we're in, to always look to God. Not for rescue necessarily, although He very much might do that. Not just to make us feel good about the situation, although He very much will do that too. But to trust in the one who, while He created the whole universe, loves each and every one of us the most. The God who, while He puts Himself out there for everyone, we are each His favorite. And when we put our confidence in that kind of God, the God who, as we are celebrating in this season of Advent, who comes to us, what can shake us? When our confidence is in the Creator of the universe, what can get in our way? It's a great line that Paul writes, if God is for us, who can be against us? What can stand against us? Because God is bigger than a fiery furnace. God is bigger than an 80-foot tall idol of gold. God is bigger than whatever we face. And when we put our trust in Him, with Him, walking beside us, we can face whatever struggle, whatever problem, whatever conflict comes across our lives.